The photograph is catalogued as ordinary. A wide boulevard in St. Petersburg dated circa 1890. Stone facades stretch into the distance, multi-story buildings with ornamented cornices. Street lamps aligned with mathematical precision. Windows intact, pavement clean. And no people, no carts, no workers, no shadows mid-motion, just architectural completeness paired with human absence. The official explanation is simple: long exposure photography. Early cameras required stillness. Moving figures vanished, yet the contradiction lingers. If this were a construction phase, why are the buildings finished? If it were dawn, why do similar images appear from Paris, Chicago, San Francisco, Melbourne, across decades, across continents? A census ledger from the same period records population surges, not emptiness, cities expanding rapidly on paper. The surface narrative describes growth. The photographs suggest inheritance. If these cities weren't being built, who were they waiting for? The textbooks tell a comfortable story. The 19th century unfolds as industrial triumph, steam engines, mass labor, brick by methodical brick. European cities expand outward from medieval cores. American settlements transform into metropolitan centers. Millions migrate from countryside to urban promise. By 1870, the pattern appears everywhere. London doubles its population within decades. New York's grid extends relentlessly northward. Paris reconstructs entire arrondissements under Haussmann's direction. The narrative feels inevitable. Human ambition plus industrial capacity equals urban expansion. Archival postcards from this era bear confident captions. Newly constructed boulevard, 1888. Modern commercial district, completed 1892. The images show grand neoclassical buildings, wide avenues, ornate lampposts, all labelled as fresh construction. Yet when examined closely, these same postcards reveal something peculiar. The buildings don't look new. Stone weathering suggests decades of exposure. Architectural details display craftsmanship that supposedly took years to develop, appearing fully formed in structures claimed to be only months old. Construction photographs from this period are strangely absent. We have images of completed buildings, we have sketches of proposed developments, but the in-between stages, the scaffolding, the half-built walls, the visible construction, rarely appear in the historical record. Census records from the 1880s and 1890s show dramatic population increases. American cities report growth rates of 30 to 50% per decade. European urban centers document similar surges. Immigration records account for some arrivals, but the numbers don't quite balance. Growth outpaces documented movement by margins too large to dismiss. Official histories attribute this to improved record-keeping. Earlier censuses, they explain, undercounted residents. Better administrative systems simply revealed populations that were always there. But improved counting doesn't explain newly occupied buildings. It doesn't account for infrastructure that appears complete in photographs dated to periods when construction should still be underway. History feels neat when told backward. Each generation inherits a completed world and assumes their predecessors built it gradually, piece by piece. The assumption goes unquestioned because questioning it seems absurd. What if these cities weren't built as described but reoccupied? The photographic evidence demands closer examination. By the 1870s and 1880s, camera technology had advanced considerably from the daguerreotypes of mid-century. Exposure times shortened. Photographers could capture motion, flags in wind, horses mid-stride, pedestrians crossing streets. Yet the empty street phenomenon persists across this entire period. Paris in 1890 shows Boulevard Haussmann completely deserted, despite census records indicating dense residential occupancy. San Francisco in 1878 displays Market Street vacant for blocks, finished buildings, installed street lamps, but no inhabitants. Chicago in 1893 during the supposed peak of World's Fair attendance, has photographs showing adjacent neighborhoods eerily still. The official explanation remains consistent. Long exposure times required for architectural documentation erased moving figures. Photographers chose early morning hours to avoid crowds. The images represent deliberate technical choices, not actual emptiness. This explanation satisfies casual inquiry. Professional photographers did use longer exposures for certain effects. Morning light does provide optimal conditions for architectural photography, but the explanation develops cracks under scrutiny. Many of these photographs show details that would require relatively short exposures: tree leaves frozen in position, flag details clearly defined, sharp shadows indicating bright conditions. The technical requirements for such clarity contradict the motion blur explanation. Photography manuals from the 1880s describe exposure improvements explicitly. An 1887 handbook notes that modern emulsions permit instantaneous exposures under favorable light, capturing street life with unprecedented clarity. If the technology existed, why do the empty street images persist? More puzzling, photographs from the same cities, same years, sometimes even same photographers, show both empty streets and populated scenes. The inconsistency suggests selection rather than technical limitation. Someone chose which images to archive, which to publish, which to preserve. The emptiness appears staged. Buildings stand complete, infrastructure installed, services ready, but the human presence feels temporarily withdrawn rather than gradually accumulating. These are not construction sites awaiting completion. They are finished environments awaiting occupancy. Why do finished cities appear staged for arrival? The documentary record supports rapid urban growth throughout the late 19th century. Census data, immigration logs, municipal records all describe cities swelling with new residents. The statistics align across sources with remarkable consistency. United States Census reports show urban population growing from 10 million in 1870 to 30 million by 1900. European records document similar trajectories. Official explanations credit industrialization, which drew rural workers to urban factories, and immigration, which brought millions across oceans seeking opportunity. City planning maps from this era label vast areas as newly developed districts. Municipal reports describe infrastructure projects, water systems, gas lines, sewage networks installed to serve expanding populations. Building permits document construction activity across urban landscapes. The archival consensus appears unshakable. Every source confirms the same narrative. Cities grew because people arrived to build them. Yet this consensus shows peculiar uniformity. Reports from different cities, different countries, even different continents employ nearly identical language. Population growth described as unprecedented yet manageable. Infrastructure installation characterized as rapid yet orderly. The phrasing suggests coordination beyond coincidental similarity. Immigration records deserve particular attention. Ellis Island processed millions of arrivals between 1892 and 1920. European ports documented similar movements, but when cross-referenced with census increases, gaps emerge. Cities gained population faster than immigration, plus natural birth rates can explain. The surplus varies by location but persists across datasets. Municipal planning documents describe areas as undeveloped 1 year, then fully occupied the next, without corresponding construction documentation. The transition from empty land to finished neighborhood happens in archival records faster than physical building permits suggest. The documents agree with each other too perfectly. Official narratives display consensus that feels manufactured rather than organically derived. Different sources using identical phrasing to describe theoretically independent phenomena raises questions about narrative coordination. census figures, immigration data, construction permits, municipal reports, all tell the same story of gradual growth. Yet when examined together, they describe a pace and scale that strains credibility. Consensus can be manufactured. The architecture itself testifies to something anomalous. Consider Philadelphia City Hall, officially completed in 1901 after 30 years of construction. The building features 25 million bricks, 700 rooms and towers reaching 548 feet. Its stonework displays precision that supposedly represents cutting-edge construction techniques. Yet when examined closely, the building shows characteristics inconsistent with late 19th century capabilities. Load-bearing calculations, stone-fitting precision, and decorative detailing suggest knowledge and tools more advanced than period documentation describes. The official timeline claims gradual construction, but the architectural unity suggests a single coherent vision executed rapidly or inherited complete. Milan Central Station, finished in 1931, presents similar contradictions. The structure features massive stone foundations extending far deeper than engineering requirements justify. Excavation during later renovations revealed additional basement levels beyond architectural plans, spaces that appear on no construction documents but show weathering consistent with far greater age. Budapest's Parliament building, completed in 1904, required 40 million bricks and 500,000 precious stones according to official records. The construction timeline claims 20 years of work, yet the architectural consistency, the ornamental precision across vast interior spaces, the integration of complex systems all suggest either impossibly coordinated labor or a structure that predated its supposed construction period. These buildings share another characteristic: massive stone foundations. When cities conduct underground infrastructure work, they repeatedly discover foundation systems extending beyond known building footprints. Subway construction in multiple cities has encountered precisely fitted stonework at depths and locations where no documented structures existed. The official explanation frames these as earlier construction phases, previous buildings demolished and rebuilt. But the stonework patterns don't match documented architectural styles from supposedly relevant periods. They represent something else, infrastructure from a building tradition not captured in conventional historical records. Or these buildings look older than their completion dates. The weathering, the foundation depth, the architectural sophistication all suggest inheritance rather than innovation. What we call construction might more accurately be described as renovation, restoration, or reoccupation. Renovation often hides inheritance. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair, officially titled the World's Columbian Exposition, presents perhaps the most striking architectural anomaly. Official records describe the construction of over 200 buildings across 600 acres in just 2 years. The exposition catalogue claims these were temporary structures built from staff, a mixture of plaster, cement, and jute fibre designed for demolition after the fair's closure. The photographs tell a different story. The buildings display classical architecture on a massive scale: Corinthian columns, ornate domes, intricate relief sculptures. The Court of Honor features a massive basin with elaborate fountains. The Manufactures Building, at that time the world's largest building by footprint, spans nearly 30 acres under a single roof. These structures housed complex electrical systems designed by Tesla and Westinghouse. They featured extensive interior plumbing, climate control, and sophisticated lighting arrays. The Architecture and the Arts Building contained galleries displaying delicate artworks that would require stable temperature and humidity control. The exposition budget, meticulously documented in fair records, totals approximately $28 million, roughly $850 million in current dollars. This figure supposedly covered construction, operation, and eventual demolition of the entire complex. Yet modern construction estimates for comparable structures suggest costs many times higher, even accounting for period labor rates. More troubling, Demolition photographs show the buildings being destroyed, but the debris appears unusual. Temporary structures supposedly made of plaster and fiber produce rubble that looks distinctly like stone and brick. The demolition process itself required intensive labor and explosive charges, far beyond what temporary materials would necessitate. Other World's Fairs from the era, Paris 1889, Buffalo 1901, St. Louis 1904, present similar patterns. Grand classical buildings officially described as temporary construction, built in time frames that strain credibility, then demolished with remarkable thoroughness. The consistency suggests a coordinated approach to something beyond simple exhibitions. Perhaps these fairs weren't showcasing future possibilities. Perhaps they were unveiling existing architecture, temporarily open to public view, before being sealed away again. The exhibitions might have served as controlled reintroductions rather than innovative demonstrations. What if the fair was an unveiling, not an invention? Between 1854 and 1929, more than 200,000 children were transported across North America through the orphan train movement. The Children's Aid Society and similar organizations relocated these children from eastern cities to rural communities, placing them with families as laborers, apprentices, or adoptees. The official narrative frames this as charitable response to urban poverty. Industrial cities supposedly produced vast numbers of orphaned and abandoned children, victims of disease, industrial accidents, and economic hardship. The orphan trains offered these children escape from streets and overcrowded institutions, but the intake records reveal something more puzzling. A disturbing number of files contain identical phrases: origin unknown, parents deceased, no record, found wandering, no identifying information available. Children arrived at foundling hospitals and orphanages by the hundreds, often in clusters, without any documentation of family history. The Foundling Hospital of New York reported receiving 2,500 infants in 1875 alone. Similar institutions in Boston, Philadelphia, and Chicago documented comparable numbers. The children's origins, where they came from, who their parents were, what circumstances led to their abandonment, remained systematically undocumented. This demographic pattern coincides precisely with urban expansion. Cities reporting the largest population growth also report the highest numbers of undocumented children. The correlation appears too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. More peculiar, many of these children were described as well-nourished and healthy, despite supposedly coming from desperate circumstances. Intake photographs show clean clothing and physical development inconsistent with street poverty. Some observers noted the children seemed recently bathed and cared for before their sudden appearance at institutional doors. The receiving families in rural areas rarely questioned the children's backgrounds. Official placements came with minimal documentation, a name, an approximate age, nothing more. Genealogical research today encounters these same walls: family trees that terminate at orphan train placements, ancestry that cannot be traced beyond institutional records. Population appears without lineage. Cities fill with children who have no documented past. The system operates with remarkable efficiency, redistributing thousands of undocumented children across a continent within a single generation. Who were these children? Where did they actually come from? And why did their origins remain so systematically obscured? The United States Census reveals troubling mathematical impossibilities when examined decade by decade. Between 1870 and 1890, urban population increased by approximately 15 million people. Immigration records from the same period document roughly 9 million arrivals. Natural birth rates, even at optimistic projections, cannot account for the 6 million person gap. The census of 1890 recorded 63 million Americans total. 20 years later, in 1910, that number reached 92 million, a 46% increase. Immigration explains some growth, but cross-referencing ship manifests, border crossings, and naturalization records leaves substantial populations unaccounted for. European cities show similar patterns. London's population supposedly doubled between 1850 and 1900, yet detailed immigration records don't support such dramatic influx. Paris rebuilt entire districts in the 1860s and 1870s, and census records show those districts immediately fully occupied, but documentation of who moved in remains sparse. More striking, population rebounds after catastrophic events occur impossibly fast. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 destroyed vast portions of the city. Within 2 years, census records show population exceeding pre-fire levels. San Francisco's 1906 earthquake devastated hundreds of city blocks. The 1910 census records more residents than 1900, despite massive physical destruction and documented outmigration. The official explanation attributes discrepancies to improved census methodology. Early accounts supposedly undercounted residents due to incomplete administrative systems. Better record-keeping simply revealed populations previously missed, but improved records don't create people. They don't explain occupied buildings that weren't there before. They don't account for neighborhoods rebuilt and repopulated faster than construction timelines allow. Census data shows another peculiarity: age distributions that don't quite follow natural demographic curves. Certain age cohorts appear overrepresented in ways that birth rate fluctuations cannot explain. The population pyramids display bulges and gaps that demographers struggle to rationalize using conventional models. Statistics can hide absence as easily as they reveal growth. Numbers on paper create illusions of continuity, but when cross-referenced against physical evidence, construction rates, immigration documentation, birth certificates, the census figures describe populations that appear rather than arrive. Who was being counted, and were they counted because they were born or because they were placed? The architectural synchronicity demands recognition. Between 1870 and 1910, nearly identical building styles emerged simultaneously across continents with no documented coordination. The Beaux-Arts aesthetic appeared in Buenos Aires, Odessa, Melbourne, and Quebec City, within remarkably narrow time frames, all featuring the same classical proportions, the same ornamental vocabulary, the same construction techniques. Buenos Aires constructed its Teatro Colón between 1889 and 1908. Odessa built its Opera House from 1884 to 1887. Melbourne's Royal Exhibition Building rose in 1879-1880. Quebec City's Parliament Building took shape from 1877 to 1886. These structures, separated by oceans and supposedly independent architectural traditions, display striking aesthetic unity. The official explanation credits international architectural education. Beaux-Arts training in Paris influenced architects worldwide, who then returned to their home countries implementing shared principles. The École des Beaux-Arts trained many prominent architects during this period, establishing consistent design standards. Yet this explanation struggles with the timing and scale. Architectural diffusion typically shows gradual regional variation as styles adapt to local conditions. Instead, we see simultaneous emergence of nearly identical buildings across vast distances. The uniformity suggests not diffusion, but simultaneous access to a shared template. Construction techniques show similar synchronicity. Complex stonework, advanced foundation systems, integrated infrastructure, these appear worldwide within the same narrow decades. The learning curve that should characterize technological diffusion seems strangely absent. Cities leap from relatively simple construction to architectural sophistication without visible transitional phases. Material sourcing presents another puzzle. Many of these buildings employ stone types not native to their regions. The official explanation involves extensive trade networks, but shipping records don't always support the claimed material movements. Some buildings contain stone varieties difficult to source even with modern logistics. The pattern extends beyond civic architecture. Residential districts, railway stations, commercial buildings all show the same mysterious coordination. The global built environment transformed remarkably uniformly during a relatively brief window, as if following a master plan never documented in surviving records. This wasn't regional innovation slowly spreading. This was simultaneous implementation across continents, as if the world was being prepared according to a single, coherent vision. Old maps preserve cartographic memory that text-based histories have erased. Well into the 19th century, atlases labeled vast territories across Central Asia as Tartaria or Tartary. The region encompassed modern Kazakhstan, parts of Russia, Mongolia, and adjoining territories, an area larger than Europe. The 1771 Encyclopaedia Britannica contains extensive entries on Tartary, describing distinct regions: Muscovite Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Tibetan Tartary, independent Tartary. The text treats these as recognized political and geographical divisions equivalent to other major world regions. By the early 20th century, the name vanishes. Modern atlases show no Tartary, no Tartarian territories. Cartographic void gets filled with nation-states, provinces, and administrative divisions, but the earlier designation disappears entirely from geographical vocabulary. This erasure lacks adequate historical explanation. Major geographical regions don't typically vanish from maps without corresponding historical events, conquests, political reorganizations, cultural transformations. Yet mainstream histories provide no clear narrative accounting for Tartary's removal from cartographic record. The architectural evidence suggests why this erasure might have occurred. Buildings across the former Tartarian territories display characteristics strikingly similar to structures worldwide that official histories attribute to 19th century construction. The same ornate stonework, the same classical proportions, and the same sophisticated engineering, all present in regions supposedly lacking advanced civilization during relevant periods. Maps from the 18th century show Tartaria featuring extensive urban development, complex political organization, and established trade routes. The cartographic record depicts an organized civilization. Then, within several generations, the record transforms. The region appears less developed, politically fragmented, culturally backward compared to European powers. The timing of this transformation coincides with the period when empty street photographs appear, when orphan numbers spike, when census mathematics stops adding up properly. A single generation witnesses massive cartographic revision, demographic disruption, and architectural progress that looks suspiciously like inheritance. Maps remember what text forgets. They preserve evidence of erased civilizations longer than official narratives permit. The Tartaria gap, the sudden disappearance of a major geographical designation without adequate historical accounting, suggests systematic removal of a civilizational layer from human memory. What fills a void erased too cleanly? The systems reveal themselves through pattern recognition. Orphan redistribution, institutional schooling, standardized architecture, uniform civic infrastructure all emerged simultaneously during the same historical window. Viewed independently, each appears as reasonable social development. Viewed together, they suggest coordinated repopulation. Consider the institutional architecture. Between 1870 and 1920, nearly identical institutional buildings appeared worldwide: orphanages, schools, hospitals, asylums. They shared architectural vocabulary, spatial organization, and operational protocols. The standardization exceeded what natural development would produce. It looked designed, implemented, according to specification. Mandatory education systems appeared during this same period, Before 1870, formal schooling remained inconsistent, locally controlled, often optional. By 1920, compulsory education was nearly universal across developed nations. The curriculum showed remarkable uniformity. The same subjects, the same historical narratives, the same civic instruction. This educational standardization served an obvious function, creating shared cultural memory. Children learned identical histories regardless of actual family backgrounds. Orphans and natural-born children received the same instruction about the past, ensuring consistent narrative across an entire generation. The civic infrastructure followed similar patterns. Identical municipal systems, water, sewage, gas, later electricity, appeared across cities worldwide using nearly identical designs. The engineering solutions showed less local variation than expected. Standard manuals circulated, but the speed and uniformity of implementation suggests something beyond gradual knowledge diffusion. Even national mythology became standardized during this window. Countries developed or dramatically revised their foundational narratives, stories of origins, tales of national character, lists of cultural heroes. These narratives appeared suddenly, taught uniformly, rarely questioned. They provided shared identity for populations that might not have organic, historical continuity. After a disruption, whether catastrophe, reset, or deliberate reorganization, repopulation requires more than moving bodies. It demands creating shared memory, establishing institutional frameworks, and implementing systems that ensure continuity. The populations need not remember what came before if they're given compelling narratives about what supposedly happened. The evidence suggests exactly such a system, a global repopulation infrastructure designed to integrate populations, wherever they originated, into a coherent civilizational framework. Not gradual social evolution, but coordinated implementation. Repopulation requires silence, and silence, sustained across generations, becomes history. The genealogical implications touch millions personally. Family history research repeatedly encounters the same wall, records that terminate in the late 19th century at orphan train placements, immigration manifests, or institutional intakes. Beyond these points, ancestry becomes untraceable. Modern genealogical databases reveal the pattern statistically. A striking percentage of North American and European family trees, estimates range from 30 to 50%, cannot be traced past 3 or 4 generations. The reasons given vary: records lost, families displaced, documentation destroyed, but the consistency and scale suggest systematic rather than incidental gaps. No record prior, the archival forms state repeatedly. Not records lost or documentation incomplete, but no record, as if the individuals simply began existing at their documented entry point. Immigration manifests list names and approximate ages, but no places of origin. Orphan intake forms provide physical descriptions, but no family information. Census records show addresses, but no previous residences. This creates identity without roots. Millions of contemporary people trace ancestry to origins that cannot be verified, to families that appeared in records without documented pasts. The personal impact resides not in historical speculation, but in concrete inability to answer basic questions about family origins. Some genealogical researchers report even stranger findings. Family lines that supposedly immigrated from specific European regions show no corresponding records in those regions. Names that should appear in church registries, tax records, or municipal documents simply don't exist in claimed places of origin. The families materialized at ports of entry without verifiable sources. The emotional weight of this discovery varies. Some experience it as liberating, freed from obligation to inherited identity. Others find it deeply disturbing, cut off from authentic connection to past generations. Most simply stop investigating, accepting the genealogical wall as inevitable limitation. But what if family trees weren't organic growths but grafted constructions? What if millions were placed into lineages designed to provide identity without requiring verifiable history? The system would work as long as everyone accepted the documented narratives, as long as curiosity stopped at convenient barriers. Inheritance doesn't require memory. It only requires acceptance. The institutional systems that govern modern life all emerged during this same historical window. Census bureaus, birth registries, educational authorities, municipal governments, all established standardized protocols between 1870 and 1920. We trust these systems because they appear permanent, institutional, authoritative. But what if their authority derives not from long-standing legitimacy, but from successfully establishing themselves during a period when questions couldn't be asked effectively? New systems impose themselves most easily on populations experiencing transition, disruption, or reorganization. Established populations with intergenerational memory resist standardization. Newly assembled populations accept institutional frameworks as given. The systems don't need to lie. They simply need to document what exists without explaining how it came to exist. A census records current residents without verifying their origins. Educational curricula teach established history without examining its foundations. Municipal archives preserve recent documentation while earlier records remain conveniently incomplete. This isn't conspiracy, it's institutional momentum. Systems perpetuate themselves by functioning consistently, not by guarding secrets. Once established, institutions operate according to their protocols without requiring conscious awareness of their origins. Bureaucrats implement procedures without understanding why those specific procedures were adopted. The trust we place in these systems feels warranted because they operate reliably in the present. Birth certificates document births. Property records track ownership. Census data informs policy. The systems work for their current purposes regardless of their founding circumstances. Yet when we dig into origins, when we ask why these systems emerged when they did, why they adopted these specific structures, why they show such international uniformity, the explanations become vague. Modernization, industrial organization, administrative efficiency. These aren't reasons, they're descriptions that substitute for explanation. The systems persist because questioning them accomplishes nothing practical. An incomplete historical record doesn't invalidate a birth certificate's current function. Mysterious institutional origins don't prevent census data from serving present needs. The systems work, so we trust them. Structures don't lie, they continue, and continuation, sustained long enough, becomes legitimacy. The question isn't whether to trust current institutions, but whether to accept their self-narrated origins without examination. Who benefits from continuity? Perhaps everyone, as long as no one asks where continuity began. Return to the photograph that opened this investigation. The empty boulevard in St. Petersburg circa 1890. We've been told it documents construction, early morning stillness, technical limitation of early cameras. The official explanation satisfied initial curiosity. Now examine it differently. The buildings stand complete, windows installed, facades finished, street lamps operational. The infrastructure suggests immediate occupancy, not gradual development. The architecture displays sophistication that supposedly represents cutting-edge achievement, but looks weathered, established, permanent. The emptiness no longer reads as photographic accident. It appears as evidence of a transitional moment, a city prepared and waiting. Not abandoned, but not yet occupied. The photograph captures an in-between state, a moment when the inheritors had not yet fully arrived. Across the world, similar photographs preserve the same moment. Empty streets in completed cities, finished buildings awaiting residents, infrastructure installed but not yet activated. The pattern repeats too consistently across too many locations to dismiss as coincidental technical limitation. Census records that follow shortly after show sudden occupation. Population figures surge, the cities fill. Official narratives describe this as construction completion and natural growth. But the sequence suggests something different: coordinated occupancy of inherited infrastructure. The orphan trains redistribute thousands of children simultaneously with urban population increases. The educational systems teach identical histories across continents. The institutional frameworks establish standardized protocols worldwide. The architectural styles appear uniformly across vast distances, all during the same historical window, all following the same patterns. Perhaps it was catastrophe, a global event that disrupted civilization and required repopulation. Perhaps it was something else, a transition between civilizations, a resetting of human organization, a coordinated transformation whose nature remains hidden. The evidence doesn't specify which interpretation better fits the pattern. What remains certain? The official narrative of gradual progress, continuous development, and documented growth cannot fully account for the accumulated evidence. The photographs, the census gaps, the architectural impossibilities, the orphan numbers, the genealogical walls, together they testify to something other than the story we've inherited. If history restarted quietly, what else did we inherit without knowing? The same empty street remains in the archive. Boulevard after boulevard, city after city, year after year. The photographs accumulate, documenting the same inexplicable absence, dressed in different architectural styles, different geographical locations, different official explanations, that all say the same inadequate thing. Not absence, perhaps. Evidence of arrival delayed. Cities prepared and waiting. Infrastructure installed for populations not yet present. The moment captured between inheritance and occupation, preserved in emulsion and paper, filed away in archives where patient investigators might eventually notice the pattern. The question doesn't demand belief. It requires only consideration. Were these cities built for us, by us, during documented construction projects spanning predictable decades? Or did we arrive into prepared spaces, guided into existing frameworks, taught histories that explained our presence without revealing our actual origins? The evidence permits both interpretations. The official narrative provides coherent explanation grounded in documented progress. The alternative reading finds patterns in anomalies, synchronicities in coincidences, coordination in what should be chaos. We cannot definitively prove either interpretation. We can only observe that certain questions remain unanswered. Certain gaps persist. Certain patterns resist conventional explanation. The empty streets testify without speaking. The orphan records accumulate without clarifying. The buildings stand without revealing their actual age. And we continue inhabiting cities whose origins we accept without fully understanding. We trace genealogies that terminate at convenient walls. We trust institutions whose founding circumstances remain vague. We believe histories that answer some questions while systematically avoiding others. Perhaps this is simply how human knowledge works: incomplete, approximate, good enough for practical purposes. Perhaps the questions don't matter because the systems function regardless of their origins. Or perhaps we were born into history, or placed inside it. The photograph still hangs in the city archive. The streets remain empty. The question remains, who were they built for?